Welcome to the deep dive. So today you've brought in quite a stack of sources, looks like mostly YouTube transcripts, all focused on the Thailand-Cambodia border, recent stuff, but also the Hun families, well, long history of political tactics.
That's right. It's a really interesting collection. He gives us a window into how internal politics in Cambodia, the pressures there, can kind of bubble up as tension on the border, especially with Thailand.
Right. So our mission today really is to dig into these transcripts, pull out the key takeaways for you, the listener. We want to get beyond the headlines, understand the why, and see how history, well, seems to be repeating itself here. It's not just a borderline, is it?
Not at all. It's about power. It's about nationalism strategy. And what's striking is seeing the same playbook being used across different times, different leaders even. It's like a pattern.
So if you're following the news from the region, or maybe you're just interested in political games or how the past shapes right now, there's a lot here to get you up to speed quickly. Let's dive in. So looking at the sources, they seem to kick things off with a specific incident, a trigger for the current tension, something at Chungbok.
Yeah, that's mentioned. The context we have points to a border clash there pretty recently, May 28th, 2025.
Okay, May 28th. And how did Phnom Penh react? What was the Cambodian government's immediate move?
Well, almost straight away, the sources say, they announced a pretty major step. They decided to take the border dispute concerning four sensitive areas to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ in The Hague.
4 areas. Which ones were those again?
Let's see. The sources list them as the Emerald Triangle, Tamon Temple, Tamon Tok Temple, and Tak Krabi Temple.
And how did the sources frame this? Like, is this seen as something totally new, out of the blue?
No, not at all. They're pretty blunt, actually. They call it the same old textbook move, a classic Hun Sen tactic.
Same old textbook, huh? What does that pattern look like?
It's described as, provoking a conflict or maybe just taking advantage of one that pops up. Then whipping up nationalism, often directing anger towards Thai specifically. It's for political gain, clearly. And then playing the victim card, maybe using international bodies like the ICJ.
So this isn't Hun Sen's first rodeo with this kind of strategy.
Oh, far from it. The sources really emphasize this. Using border disputes, territorial arguments.
Yeah.
It's been one of his main tools, maybe the main tool, for staying in power. We're talking nearly 40 years.
40 years. Wow. Okay, so let's unpack that core tactic a bit more. Why is stirring things up over the border so, I guess, effective for him politically?
Well, fundamentally, it taps into nationalism, right? He positions himself as the strong leader, the hero defending Cambodian land, Cambodian history, sacred sites, and that creates a powerful sense of unity, rallies people behind him. Even if, the unfortunate side effect is creating bad blood between ordinary Thai and Cambodian people.
Yeah, I remember the sources mentioned a specific study that dug into this, right? Back in 2017.
That's right, yeah. A study in the current Southeast Asian Affair Journal. It looked specifically at the Priya Vihar situation and Hun Sen's use of nationalism around it.
And what did it find? Does it say both sides do this?
It found that, yeah, both governments generally try to keep things from boiling over into, like, a full-scale war. But, and this is the key part, enough tension is deliberately stirred up, particularly by the Cambodian side, to ignite that nationalist feeling inside Cambodia.
Deliberately stirred up. How?
The study pointed to state media, academics, used to consistently frame Thailand as the bad guy, the aggressor, and Cambodia as the victim, just trying to defend itself.
And the goal is?
Well, the study suggests the goal is to win public support, especially maybe distract people before an election, turn attention away from bigger problems at home.
And that World Court decision back in 2013 on Priya Vihar, that must have just reinforced his belief that this tactic works.
Absolutely. The sources make that connection. That 2013 ruling, which mostly favored Cambodia regarding the area right around the temple, it basically validated his approach. It showed this strategy could deliver results, or at least be spun as a victory.
So when tension flares up now, he can just step right in.
Exactly. He plays the patriot card immediately, defending sacred ground. He pushes these historical stories, connects people emotionally to places like Priya Vihar or these Tamon temples now. So any perceived slight, any incident, feels like an attack on Cambodia itself.
And Thailand gets painted as the aggressor, the one undermining peace.
Right. That's the narrative. It really frames these temples, as the sources say, less as historical sites and more as political weapons for the ruling family.
Political weapons. And the easiest way to wield them is?
Anti-Thai sentiment. It's presented as the most readily available tool. This lines up with another source mentioned, an article from the Preeti Benamong Institute.
What did that one say?
It basically argued that Cambodian governments, sort of historically, tend to reach for border issues whenever they're feeling pressure internally or when elections are coming up. It boosts patriotism, makes them look like protectors of independence. And they use information warfare, propaganda, to push that idea of Thailand always trying to encroach.
Okay, so if it's a historical tendency, it wasn't just Hun Sen then. Did the sources trace this back further?
They did, yeah. They actually point to Sihanouk as the one who really pioneered using border issues this way to build up nationalism for political ends.
Sihanouk.
King Sihanouk, the very same. He became king super young, 1941, only 19 years old. Apparently, the French thought he'd be easier to manage than his father.
And Cambodia back then was under French protection.
Yes, largely because they wanted protection from Siam, from Thailand's influence. But Sihanouk, he was the one who famously took the Preah Vihear case to the World Court, and he won it for Cambodia in 1962.
Okay, now this 1962 ruling, the sources mention something really surprising here. It wasn't based on the usual rules, like the watershed line from the old treaty with France.
Right, that's a key point the sources dig into. The treaty line, the 1893 Siam French one, based on the watershed, that would actually put the temple in Thailand.
So, if it wasn't the map, what was it? How did Cambodia win?
Well, this is where it gets murky. The sources claim it came down to behind-the-scenes lobbying. Specifically, the United States leaning on the judges.
U.S. Why would they get involved?
Cold War politics and the Vietnam War. The U.S. was really trying to court Sihanouk, get him on their side. The big issue was the Ho Chi Minh Trail running through Cambodian territory.
Ah, they wanted him to stop the North Vietnamese using it.
Exactly, prevent troops and supplies flowing through Cambodia. So winning him over with a favorable court ruling on the temple, that was seen as, a potential bargaining chip.
But Sihanouk didn't exactly jump into the U.S. camp, did he? He tried to stay neutral.
He did. He was big in the non-aligned movement. But the sources say he still kind of let the Vietnamese use the trail anyway, which made the U.S. pretty distrustful.
And internally, Sihanouk had problems, too.
Yeah, the sources mention his government really favored the elite, didn't do much for the average farmer. This created a lot of discontent, which helped groups like the Khmer Issarak grow, and they eventually morphed into, the Khmer Rouge.
Then after Sihanouk was ousted, there was Lon Nol for a few years.
Correct. Lon Nol took power in a coup in 1970, last till 75. And guess what? He also used border nationalism. He even made claims on sea areas, like near Kokud. But ultimately, he couldn't hold off the Khmer Rouge.
Which brings us right back to Hun Sen's own story, starting within that horrific Khmer Rouge regime.
Right. The Khmer Rouge era, 75 to 79, backed heavily by China, influenced by Mao's Cultural Revolution. Pol Pot's incredibly brutal interpretation of it. And they had ambitions, too, wanted to reclaim southern Vietnam, places like Saigon.
And Hun Sen was part of that. How did he get involved?
Well, his background, according to his father's records cited in the sources, he was born in 52, left home, ended up a temple boy in Phnom Penh, then joined the Khmer Rouge when he was about 17.
But wait, the sources mention something about his birth date.
Ah, yes, that's a curious detail. Apparently, he changed his birth date in the Khmer Rouge records to April 4th, 1951. The thinking, according to the sources, was he needed to appear 18 or older to be officially accepted as a soldier. So that's why you sometimes see two different birth years for him.
And his name changed, too.
Yeah, originally Hun Bunan, then Sein Rithi as the temple boy, then Hun Sen, spelled differently but sounds like Sen, when he joined the Khmer Rouge.
So what made him turn against the Khmer Rouge? Why did he flee?
The sources point to a very personal tragedy and a sense of betrayal. His first son died just a week after being born. He apparently blamed the Angkar, the Khmer Rouge leadership, for policies that kept him from his wife during the pregnancy, which he felt led to the death. That bitterness drove him to defect to Vietnam in 1977.
And Vietnam took him in. Weren't they wary?
They were, initially. The sources say they vetted him for about a year, checking if he's a spy. But once they were satisfied, they actively supported him. They brought him together with other defectors, Hang Samrin, Che Sim, and helped them plan the Khmer Rouge's overthrow.
They even gave him a Vietnamese name.
Yeah, Mai Phuc means something like new season or prosperity.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like they saw him as pivotal for Cambodia's future, even back then.
Which led straight to Vietnam invading Cambodia in 79.
It did. January 79, they went in, drove the Khmer Rouge out. That whole thing caused a massive split in the communist world, Soviet Union and Vietnam versus China and the Khmer Rouge they backed.
And left Cambodia incredibly fractured. The Khmer Four factions, period.
Exactly. You had Sihanouk's group, Lon Nol's remnants, who are more pro-U.S., the Khmer Rouge still fighting from the jungles backed by China, and then the faction Vietnam installed Heng Samrin, Che Sem, and crucially, Hun Sen, backed by the Soviets in Vietnam.
And Hun Sen climbed the ladder really fast within that Vietnamese-backed government.
Incredibly fast. He became deputy PM and foreign minister very young, starting right in '79, then prime minister by 1985.
But didn't he actually lose an election later on in '93 but somehow stayed PM? How did that work?
Yeah, that's a testament to his political maneuvering, as the sources describe it. His party, the CPP, lost the UN-supervised election in '93 to Prince Ranarid's Hun Sen party. But no single party got the two-thirds majority needed to govern alone.
Ah, so a coalition was needed.
Right, and the outcome was this awkward setup with two prime ministers. Ranarid was first PM, but Hun Sen became second PM, so even though he lost, he kept a firm grip on power.
And he picked up that title Samdech somewhere along the way, even though he's not royalty.
That came in 1995, according to the sources. While he was co-PM with Ranarid, who was King Sihanouk's son, Sihanouk essentially gave Hun Sen the title, kind of like adopting him symbolically.
To give him legitimacy alongside the royals.
Seems like it. The sources suggest it was a move to elevate him, even while, maybe cynically, Hun Sen was already planning how to sideline his rivals, including Ranarid himself.
Which he eventually did. Ruthlessly, it sounds like.
Pretty much. The sources detail how he pushed out Sam Rainsy, who was finance minister, trying to clean things up and disrupting Hun Sen's financial networks. Then, crucially, he launched a violent coup against Ranarid in 1997, right before the '98 election. That cleared the way for his complete dominance.
So bringing it back to today, Hun Manet takes over as PM in 2023, and suddenly border issues flare up again. History rhyming?
It certainly looks that way. The sources suggest Hun Manet is facing, well, some serious challenges. An economic downturn, maybe a crisis of public trust, and he just doesn't have the same charisma or established authority his father built over decades.
So the thinking is his father, Hun Sen, needs to prop him up, build his image.
That's the interpretation offered in the sources, yes. Hun Sen needs to make his son look like a strong, decisive leader, a national hero, and the easiest, most reliable way to do that, based on past experience.
Stir up trouble with Thailand.
Exactly. Use the border issue.
So the clash at Chongbuk, taking the 4 temples to the ICJ, it all fits that pattern.
Perfectly, according to this analysis. The sources note Cambodia's public justification. That border talks with Vietnam and Laos are mostly done, but stalled with Thailand for 25 years, so the court is needed.
But Hun Sen himself, what's his public line on this? Is he sounding aggressive?
Publicly, the sources report he's framing it as being about sovereignty and law, not anger. He's even said things like, if they don't push back on these issues, the opposition will call them weak.
Speaking of the opposition, Sam Rainsy, is he using this too?
Oh, absolutely. The sources say Rainsy, even from exile, keeps hammering on nationalism and border issues, land, sea, like the Kokud thing earlier this year. He uses it to attack Hun Manet's government, calling them weak, sometimes suggesting they're too cozy with Thailand, maybe even pointing fingers at the Hun Sen-Thaksin relationship.
Right, that Thaksin connection keeps coming up. How does that play into the Cambodia-Thailand dynamic?
It adds a layer of complexity and mistrust, certainly from the Thai side. The sources explain that while Cambodia and Vietnam have their own complicated history conflict, but also Vietnam putting Hun Sen's group in power, that history makes it harder for Cambodia to be really aggressive towards Vietnam.
But Thailand is fair game.
It seems easier politically. There isn't that same historical debt. And then you have the Hun Sen-Thaksin relationship. Hun Sen was very supportive of Thaksin and his sister Yingluck when they were out of power.
And that makes the Thai establishment nervous.
Very nervous, according to the sources. There's suspicion among some Thai elites that because of that closeness, Thailand might get taken advantage of, or that Thai interests might become secondary to whatever the Hun family needs politically at that moment.
So the main goal right now, taking these cases to the ICJ, it's probably not really about winning those specific plots of land.
The sources strongly suggest that's not the primary driver, especially since the 2013 ruling wasn't a total win anyway. The real game, they argue, is domestic. It's about distracting from problems at home and building up Hun Manet's image, making him look tough.
And those problems at home sound quite serious? That crisis of trust you mentioned?
Yeah, the sources paint a picture of deep-seated issues. Despite decades of rule, average Cambodians face real poverty. They mention garment workers, huge numbers, maybe 800,000 supporting millions more, earning very little like $288 a month, maybe 7,000 baht,
While basics are expensive?
Right. They give the example of noodles costing 140 baht. And these workers are hit by global trade shifts, too. Plus, a huge issue mentioned is land evictions. Maybe 500,000 families displaced for big agricultural projects.
And who benefits from those projects?
Well, the sources allege they often benefit a core group, maybe 8 main groups, tied closely to Hun Sen's own finances. So you can see how that creates massive resentment.
And that resentment is why this nationalist push is happening now, to paper over those cracks.
That's the argument presented. Sam Rainsy gained traction precisely because people were unhappy with the inequality, the gap between the elite's wealth and their own struggles.
Yeah.
So this border stuff, the nationalism, it's seen as a direct attempt to counter that dissatisfaction, rally people around the flag, and bolster Hun Manet.
And they're using the military for visuals too, parades and things.
Yes, increased military activities, exercises, parades featuring Hun Manet and also his brother Hun Manet, who runs intelligence. It's all part of projecting strength, building that hero image.
It really does sound like the family has cemented its control across the board.
It's described as incredibly thorough. Hun Sen himself, with the top military rank of marshal, only he and the king have it, is seen as the ultimate power broker. Hun Manet, a 4-star general, is PM and heads the army. Hun Manet, deputy PM, controls intelligence. Another daughter reportedly controls media. They mention the family and cronies controlling vast wealth, hundreds of businesses.
And anyone who speaks out
Faces serious consequences. The sources say critics inside Cambodia are quickly dealt with. Legal action, jail. There's no real effective opposition left inside the country. Sam Rainsy can't go back. Hun Sen actively blocks his return.
The sources mention Hun Sen has health issues. What happens if he's no longer there? Is there a risk of instability?
They suggest there could be, yes. Despite the tight control now, if Hun Sen passes, all that suppressed anger and dissatisfaction could potentially erupt. There's a possibility of, well, significant turmoil.
And where does the king fit into all this? Is he just a figurehead?
He appears largely subordinate, according to the source's interpretation. King Sihamoni, who's Ranrit's half-brother, maybe chosen because he wasn't seen as politically ambitious, seems to defer to Hun Sen. They mention videos showing the king standing while Hun Sen speaks, which is unusual protocol. The implication is Hun Sen's power even overshadows the monarchy, perhaps even influencing succession.
So for Thailand, watching all this, it's a tricky situation. How should they respond without getting played?
It's a huge challenge. The sources really stress this. Thailand needs to avoid getting sucked into a conflict that primarily serves the Hun family's domestic political agenda. Just reacting defensively could actually validate their strategy and harm Thai interests.
So what should Thailand do, according to the sources? Any advice?
The suggestion is to be, well, sophisticated. Use official channels, foreign ministry, military MAC department to calmly and clearly explain the facts to the Thai public. Explain the MOU from 2000. Explain that the border isn't fully marked yet. Explain what the 2013 ICJ ruling actually said.
So transparency and context, not just military readiness.
Exactly. Educate the public on the history and the political game being played. And crucially, the sources recognize that even friendly gestures from Hun Sen might not be entirely sincere. They're likely driven by his own political calculations. Don't mistake close ties, like the Thaksin relationship, for genuine alignment of interests.
Looking at the big picture then, this isn't really about a border dispute in the end, is it? It's about maintaining power.
That seems to be the core conclusion from the sources. They portray Hun Sen's long rule as fundamentally about turning Cambodia into, essentially, a family business. The number one goal is keeping the family in power, keeping control of the wealth, using whatever means work, regardless of fairness or legality.
They even compared him to Lee Kuan Yew.
Yes, contrasting Hun Sen's nearly 40 years with Lee Kuan Yew's 33 in Singapore. The point made was the difference in focus Lee Kuan Yew, building up the nation, versus, sources argue, Hun Sen consolidating family wealth, despite Cambodia having far more natural resources than Singapore started with.
And that visible wealth, alongside the widespread poverty, just fuels that crisis of trust we talked about.
Precisely. That stark contrast is seen as the root problem. The current nationalism, the border tensions, it's viewed as an attempt to put a bandage on that deep internal wound, to distract from the fundamental disconnect between the rulers and the ruled.
So wrapping this up for you, the listener, what's the key takeaway? These current border tensions, they're not just random events. They fit into a long pattern, a political playbook, really, used especially by the Hun family in Cambodia. It involves using nationalism, often specifically anti-Thai feelings, to shore up power, especially when facing problems at home.
Yeah, and at its heart, this latest push with the ICJ seems less about getting a final border ruling and much more about boosting Hun Manet's image. It's about ensuring the family's grip continues, trying to manage that crisis of public confidence and navigate economic headwinds by playing the nationalism card again.
So, thinking beyond just today's headlines, with this long history of strategic nationalism, internal power plays, and all that simmering public discontent, what does this mean for stability in the wider region? And how can neighbors like Thailand deal with these calculated moves without just becoming, well, pieces in someone else's game?
It certainly makes you think about the layers upon layers involved in politics and history in Southeast Asia. There's always more going on beneath the surface.